as I'm talking about suffering, I'm thinking about suffering, praying about it. I think in our culture generally, we tend to see all pain in like one category. And at least for me, I think of it as a problem to be addressed, right? Um, yes, if I get a headache, maybe I'm dehydrated. Maybe I need to sleep. Definitely going to have some coffee or some kind of caffeine to help kick it. But we tend to take this point of view into all suffering. And all suffering is not the same. Not all suffering is a problem that we can solve. It's a mystery to be received. So here's what I'm going to ask tonight. What if suffering, the suffering we experience, is actually an opportunity and can become a sacred place of communion with God? And if that's true, how does that work? Hit it. So this is going to be kind of our guiding scripture for the night. From Romans, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. I do have, by the way, in like the handout, all of the quotations, I think all the quotations are listed there already. So by offering my life with all its messiness and sin and sickness and the ugliness of the fallen world, offering this becomes my worship of God that only I can accomplish, nobody else. And somehow that act of offering this crazy mess makes this worship holy. That's like wild to me. So this is sort of the classroom where God began teaching me through all of my own body's weakness what kind of worship that is. So as Father said, tonight we're going to focus on suffering. And this is such a tender place, which is, you're going to see me referencing my notes a lot because it's such a heart topic that I could like just go nuts talk about other stuff. So to keep myself on track here. But I also want to like reverence the fact that each person in this room has a story of suffering. And all of us will likely experience more suffering, right? And God has a unique plan laid out for all those things. So we don't need to compare suffering to one another. The story I'm going to share might not directly relate to the suffering you've experienced. That's totally okay. God knows exactly what each of us need and how we're going to experience it. So as much as He allows me in my weakness, I desperately want to be an avenue of communication of God's heart to you. And I'll definitely do this imperfectly, but I trust His goodness to honor my desire to communicate Him well in these tender places. So I'm going to share my experience with you and then let the church's beautiful, rich tradition take the lead on a lot of the theology. So forgive all the quotations. That's why I wrote them all down. But my earnest desire is to share with you the story of how God graciously met me and walked with me in my deepest suffering. And because of what He's done, I can now trust Him enough to really believe that everything in my life is a gift from a good God, even if all evidence points to the contrary. And we know He loves to make all things new. Okay, so before we get to the meat of the topic, a little bit about who I am. I was raised in Hudson with Father David. I have in my notes, known since he was 8, but you said 9 or 10? Yeah. And actually, and Jen Ricard as well. So if you were here earlier on in the series, Jen mentions me and my husband, my name, and our pictures are in her presentation. So that was kind of cool. I watched hers in the video. We've been married for almost 9 years. Oh, that looks nice up there. We have 2 kids. My daughter's name is Zelly Ray, and Ephraim, who we adopted last year, and is Father David's godson, as he said. So I was raised in a Catholic home, which I'm very grateful for, but there was, like I imagine in my parents' homes as children, there was no emphasis placed on relationship with God, right? So I had really no anchor of identity. I wasn't really good at anything. Any middle child people in here? No. Okay. You're like, who am I? Nobody knows. Nobody cares. But I was, left trying to figure that out, trying to search out who I am. So I went on my own way, and like many teenagers, crashed and burned when that didn't work out because I sought affirmation from popular girls and from boyfriends and, landed myself in a bad place. But eventually I was left hopeless and empty and alone And now this is the kind of pain that like is a problem to be addressed, right? Sometimes we experience things and we're like, something's wrong here. Something needs to be fixed. I have a really dear friend, Father David knows her, Trisha, who once said to me, I pray you're miserable until you're doing God's will. Which is really actually a beautiful prayer. At the time I was like, rude. But I wasn't doing God's will. And she was like, that's gonna help you to know if you're no longer miserable. So at about 16 years old, with nowhere else to run, Jesus met me there and through a very tiny opening in my heart started filling me up. And I came to believe in him and love him, and had the great grace of going to St. Mary's in Hudson, like Father David, and they have a great life teen program. So I had beautiful souls around me to help me navigate turning my life around, really. And then I chose to go to Franciscan University of Steubenville. Any Franciscan people in here? Okay, that's totally fine. That's what I would expect, but I gave a talk at the seminary last week, and like halfway through, two of them were like, we also went to Franciscan, and anyway, so I should check from now on. But I sort of chose to go there because I wanted some guide rails on my life. I was like, I need some like positive peer pressure to kind of keep me on track. And I really, really loved it. I ended up leaving with a theology degree, which was kind of accidental, but that's where my grades were the best, and I just loved learning about God. I didn't have to study. Like, it didn't feel like studying to me. I just loved learning about him and talking about him and getting to know him in these different areas. So I discerned religious life after that, but ended up going into foreign missions instead, and then married and met and married my husband, Owen. And then we went back into missions together for a time, and then eventually moved back to Akron. So now we're here in Akron, up in Akron. And I'm a fertility care practitioner, which means I teach women and couples how to chart using NFP, according to church teaching. And if I'm asked to speak publicly, I usually speak about like NFP, fertility, sex, etc. And I have to like find ways to include my favorite topic, which is redemptive suffering. So this is so fun for me because that's what I get to talk about. So this is like my dream combination. So I'm very happy to be here with you. So as I understand it, you've like kind of dove into theology of the body in the last few weeks and explored the glory of the human person and God's creation and beauty. But we also have to acknowledge that life in a fallen world affects all of this, right? And when our bodies suffer, there's like an alarm bell that goes off in my head, like a check engine light almost. So when I'm suffering, when my body is suffering, what does this mean about how I was created? Is the image of God still present there? Well, yes, of course. If the body reveals God, then the suffering body must reveal something about God too. Because the most important event in all of human history includes the suffering and death of the person of Jesus, who has a body, right? After all, our ultimate goal is to conform to Christ, right? We go to a Byzantine Catholic church, and they love talking about theosis, which is this idea of becoming more and more like God so that you can become one with him. And that conformity doesn't just refer to our souls, right? It also refers to our body, because we're body and soul, just like Jesus. So let's dig into the problem. Namely, we tend to view all suffering as a problem to be solved instead of as a mystery to be received. But why? On one hand, there's a culture of avoidance. At least that's how it kind of was when I was growing up. It wasn't like explicitly taught, but it was just sort of understood that most people are not going to be breaking open deeply personal matters to each other, not to their community or friends, sometimes not even at the dinner table. And the idea was kind of like, everyone has problems, you know? So if you're going through something, just keep it to yourself, because that vulnerability is just too messy, and it's easier to like sweep it under the rug. Did anybody else grow up like this? Like sort of just, let's just not. Let's just not. And I get that, and I get the appeal of it as well, because it is messy. But this turns us into people who suffer alone and who are unable to ask for help. I heard Father Boniface once say, who's a monk, sorrow shared is half the sorrow. Joy shared is twice the joy. And it really, it requires some authentic vulnerability, which our culture doesn't really like, especially if you don't like messes, because it can get kind of messy, you know? But the pendulum has sort of swung the other way in our culture, so we see kind of the other extreme as well. where every type of discomfort or annoyance has like a victim class where you can like get a college scholarship for anything that you are, suffering with. I've heard it called the Victim Olympics, like whoever suffers most wins. And so now there's this like generation of people who have learned that life is easier for you the more noise you make when you're hurting, and the loudest whiner gets a gold medal. Somehow these like 1 and 1 has made 5, and it's kind of just a mess out there when it comes to suffering. So somehow what that's produced is this culture that sort of believes if it hurts, fix it quickly and don't make a mess about it. If it's broken, throw it away or get a better one. If it's hard for you, just quit it. If it's ugly, mask it. If it ages, erase it. If I'm uncomfortable in any way, I shouldn't be. Essentially, this worldview tells us I ought to be totally content and satisfied at every moment, and if not, just try harder or fake it. We've gotten so good at inventing ways to scoot out from beneath the cross of suffering that most people truly believe that you can and should avoid all discomfort. I have friends of this mindset who will sometimes see our life like normal fasting or something, and they do not get it. They cannot comprehend allowing some kind of discomfort to go on, let alone like taking it on purpose. But as a result, we have developed millions, like a whole economy of ways to eliminate suffering from our lives, from like the smallest annoyance to, I don't know, a big thing. And well, speaking of big things, some of them are great, right? My son Ephraim, he was adopted and he was born with a cleft lip and palate. So he was aspirating everything he tried to eat. And he ended up getting a G-tube, which is amazing. Like 100 years ago, I don't know what he would have starved, or I don't know. So thank God for some of these inventions. But we also just got a new car with heated seats. And I'm like, I don't think I could ever go back. I'll have like a hissy fit. What am I going to do? So it's also created like these first world problems. So falling into this pattern of thinking like I should never have to be uncomfortable is really tempting, even if it's kind of subconscious. Because if it's true that all suffering is unnecessary and has no purpose, then of course we should try to eliminate it. But there are also times we're okay with suffering, right? We can all acknowledge there's like a difference between stubbing my toe and giving birth, right? What's the difference, do you think? Anybody? Pain? Oh, more pain, certainly. Men only have to do one. That's a good one. What else? What else is different about those two things? The purpose. Yes, that's true, right? One is more meaningful and purposeful, has a good outcome. The other appears to be meaningless. So sometimes we're able to accept discomfort if it has a reason I can get behind, And in some instances, we can even see why it's necessary, right? If I go to the chiropractor, I know it might hurt for a minute, but it's going to be worth it in the end to me. My dad and my brother, Father David, are big runners. My family runs marathons, and they have to endure a lot of discomfort for the goal that they're trying to achieve, and they find it worth it. Do we have any cold plunge people? Oh, good. I mean, I respect it, but it's just like, wow, there's people now willingly getting into tubs of ice for the benefits, which seem amazing, but I'm not here for that. I can't do that. But to them, it seems worth it for some reason. Now, another aspect that makes some suffering different than others is having the choice to suffer or not, right? So like chiropractor, exercise, like you're making this kind of autonomous choice. Most of the time, though, I think suffering feels more like something that's being imposed upon me than something I'm choosing. But that can't be all that differentiates it, right, from other types of suffering, because I can choose to stub my toe right now, and the pain will be the same, and I'll still hate it either way. So it's not just my autonomy I'm looking for. So why don't we naturally accept suffering? Why do we want to avoid it? Because our aversion to suffering is actually a lot deeper than I just don't want it. That's like, I was trying to sit down and think, why don't I like this? And that's all that can come to my mind. It sounds like our daughter when we're telling her to go to bed. I just don't want to. Can't really come up with a reason. But the truth is I was made for heaven. I wasn't made to suffer the way this fallen world allows us to. So it means we're not wrong to long for wholeness. This is what we're made for. But we are wrong to think we can manufacture wholeness, happiness, and peace apart from God. But that deep desire is not wrong. So when suffering comes and we feel that immediate aversion, my reaction isn't actually evil in itself, because we're children of Adam and Eve. So now when we suffer, we feel threatened, and we believe we can find a way to kind of fix it ourselves, right? How do we do this? We do exactly what Adam and Eve did. We grasp for control, we turn to drugs and alcohol and money and entertainment, and develop addictions to numb ourselves in order to take control of our discomfort. We turn to materialism, cosmetic culture, injections, plastic surgery to take control of appearance or aging. We turn to contraception, abortion, artificial reproductive technologies, sterilization to control fertility. We even develop practices like assisted suicide to take control of our own death. We're so uncomfortable with suffering that we'll do almost anything to avoid it. So here's kind of where the beginning of my story starts. When Owen and I got married, I had already been carrying around a fear of suffering for a long time. Like most little girls, I've always wanted to be a mom, but I was 13 when a doctor first told me I may never have children. And I lived with that fear for 10 years, just kind of lingering in the distance. But then when we got married, to my horror, it was true. It was happening. It was real. We were missionaries at the time, living in community with other missionary families. And as you can imagine, there were children everywhere. They were constantly having more. And we lived in an apartment above a house with lots of little children. And like one of my most distinct memories of that time is watching the pregnancy test, waiting for it to result, and hearing the pitter-patter of little feet. And we had community prayer every day with our beautiful, beautiful community. And when we'd separate for small group or Bible study, the leaders would say, okay, mom's over here and dad's over here. And they weren't trying to exclude me, and they weren't thinking about it, but it just played into the fact that I felt like I didn't belong. And I'll never forget my first Mother's Day when we were married, and all my friends around us being asked to stand for the Mother's Day blessing during Mass. I was shocked at how distraught I could be about that. But part of it's because I didn't have any framework for suffering. So like this sent me in my entire life into a tailspin. Because my only framework, and this is after I have a theology degree, but my only real framework for experiencing suffering was like stubbing my toe. It was like, I don't want to do that, and I'm going to try to avoid it at all times. I knew Jesus suffered for me, obviously, but when it comes to my life, I just felt like it was kind of unnecessary. So when I began to really suffer beneath the weight of this cross, I bucked underneath it like an unbroken horse. And I would have done anything to get out from underneath it. I believe that if God was good, then he must obviously will for me to be healed and have babies. Like, it's just, that's how it must go. So if that's not happening, then it's a problem with me. There must be a problem on my end because it's not on God's end. It could only be because I'm deficient or dysfunctional in some way. So if this issue is me and I'm both body and soul, then I need to look at fixing both body and soul. Very prudent, right? So if the problem was bodily, I believed I could fix it with more effort and knowledge. So I began just devouring information about the biological aspects of our infertility. Became obsessed with discovering like a misdiagnosis or untested lab that would tell us how to solve this problem. I was so intent on learning everything I could that I would like put my spiritual reading aside to read a fertility textbook. That's what I had on my nightstand. And I eventually became a fertility care practitioner, kind of on accident, because I just wanted more information, and that was the only way to get more. My grasping for control was disguised as diligence, and it seemed very diligent. There was a lot of virtue that I could say was happening by looking into all these things. But the second way we tried to fix it was fix it, meaning me, fix the problem of myself, was on the spiritual front. The Catechism tells us that suffering is a consequence of original sin. Okay, got it. So let's look for spiritual causes of infertility. Maybe this was punishment for some sin I hadn't confessed, so I would go to confession like every week. Or maybe I was holding on to some unforgiveness for somebody. The Bible has stories of fertility being withheld for disobedience and being rewarded for those who had enough faith. So every day I would tell God and everyone around me, I know God is going to heal me. I know this is going to happen. This is happening. Like, get ready for this big miracle. So we also were looking for every spiritual avenue to receive God's healing, just in case. I never struggled being honest with God. I know that that's something that people experience, but I came to know him, as a teenager, and he already knew all the crazy stuff I had done. So that was good. I was crying out to him day and night. I received prayer from people known for healing. We used all the relics. We prayed all the St. Gerard prayers. People love coming up and telling you the one exact prayer you have to pray to get a baby. I mean, again, very well-meaning, beautiful people. But none of them worked. We prayed them all. We made pilgrimages. I went through a whole bottle of Lord's water that somebody gave us. I received the anointing of the sick many times. And at this point, I had studied theology of the body in college, and I knew everything I could about fertility care without actually becoming a medical professional. And I knew the way that my body was supposed to reflect God and how it was meant to function. But no matter what we learned or how we prayed, the treatments just weren't working to succeed in fixing the problem. And each negative test further confirmed my deep fear that my body might never be good enough to truly reflect the image of God. And I started wondering what this means for my femininity. What does this mean for me as a wife if I can't do my main job? And this is a natural response to suffering, right? Why? It's like the number one question in our house with my daughter who's just turned 6. But why? And I was constantly asking him, God, why are you doing this? And I remembered in my theology textbooks that God doesn't desire our suffering, but his permissive will allows it because suffering is a result of our free will. I say it like that. Everything I just said was true, and it's wonderful. But when you're in the midst of suffering, it doesn't matter. It didn't matter to me, because either way, he's the only one capable of creating human life. So ultimately, the choice is coming down to him. And I still wasn't pregnant. So when my body didn't do what it was supposed to do, I felt betrayed by it. And when God didn't do what he was supposed to do, I felt betrayed by him. No matter how much I turned this over in my mind, I could only come up with 2 options for why this was happening. Number 1, either I was as despicable and ugly as I think I am, and this is proof. And it's not God's fault. God is good, I'm just not. And so I can't receive this gift from him. Number 2, another option, maybe God is as present as I think he is, but he's not as good. Maybe he actually isn't exactly who I thought he was. Jackie Hill Perry is an evangelical Bible teacher I really love listening to and learning from. And she says, when our hope does not produce what we wanted it to, we put God on the stand and accuse him of not being himself. And that's sort of backwards, right? We don't interrogate our hope, we interrogate God, assuming that we're hoping for the right thing. And it's very easy when you're hoping for a baby to think you're hoping in the right thing, because Catholic Church loves babies. God loves babies, of course. So there was no way that was the wrong thing. So I could not comprehend how a good father, we sang that song every day, and I'd be like, ugh, good father. I love it now. But how he would allow his beloved daughter, so-called, to suffer in this way. I just could not get it. So either I'm not a beloved daughter, or he's not a good father, or both. And me getting pregnant was the only option I was giving him to prove that he was good. I wasn't going to receive anything else. I actually said that word for word. I will receive no blessing but a baby. And my life was really beautiful at the time. And I look back and think I didn't receive some of those gifts. But this inner turmoil produced a very real crisis of identity and faith at the same time. So every breath I took, it just became harder and harder under the weight of this cross, because it seemed like it was revealing who I feared God was. My poor sweet husband, who was very faithful and gentle with me, he was doing great, but I was freaking out. I mean, maybe you were too, but you did great. I asked every wise person I could find, if we believe Jesus hung on the cross and died in my place so that I didn't have to, why am I always dying? And no one can answer my question. No one. I started to think that asking the question was hurting other people's faith. So I stopped asking, because they were like, oh, I don't really know how to answer that. So I started to fear maybe the whole thing wasn't true. And you can see like the very foundations of the whole life that I had built were crumbling beneath my feet. And looking around at my life, I just didn't recognize it or myself. And I was just like, how did we get here? When did this misunderstanding begin? So I'm going to reference this book a lot. It's my all-time favorite book. I told Father I could have just stood up here and read it because it's so good. But he summarizes this question really well. It's called Into Your Hands, Father, the book. It began in paradise during the conversation between the woman and the serpent. Why should we not be allowed to eat of the fruit? Why the prohibition? And now the conversation might be characterized as, if God takes our salvation seriously, why does he not reveal himself more clearly? Why does he make things so difficult for us? Why so much suffering? Why such unrealistic demands that no one can live up to? Should we not rather say that everything was wrong in the beginning? Why did God create man so weak and foolish that sin was almost inevitable? I was so affected by this crisis I was experiencing that we left missions and moved back to Ohio, partly to be closer to our families who both live up here, but just looking at a child, I fell apart. So one day, it was finally time to take another pregnancy test, and I waited the whole cycle for this day, but it was like the day I dreaded the most. And as I waited for the pregnancy test to read its result, I was trying to muster up some courage and some hope within myself, and I would say things like, you know what, God's just writing a really dramatic story. This is going to be where the story turns around. This is going to be it. I'll be healed, and I'll write this in my memoir as the day that he did it and proved that he was good. A few minutes passed, and the test was negative, as it always was, and I was really inconsolable at this point. Lamentations has a great line that says, I've cried until the tears no longer come. My heart is broken. And this had happened a million times before, but this time I was just so full of anguish. I couldn't even get up off the bathroom floor. And Owen tried to help, but nothing was working. So eventually he just got down on the floor and sat with me. And after a while, kind of through sobs, I could hear him start praying out loud. But after a time, his voice kind of started drowning out. I couldn't really hear what he was saying because I was having such a clear mental image. I didn't see anything. It was just in my head. But in this image in my head, while Owen's praying over me on the bathroom floor, I was face down in the dirt and mud. I couldn't see where I was or what this thing on my back was, but I had this weight on my back. It's not what you think. And looking up, just like barely, I saw the face of this frail old like monk kind of looking guy. And I was like, go get help. Like, go get help. You obviously can't help me, but I need help. My legs could move, but the weight on my shoulders was pushing my head and my face deeper into the mud. And I tried to get out, but the weight was too heavy. I tried to scoot out to the left, to the right, backwards, forwards. I could not get out from underneath it. And the more I struggled, the heavier the weight became. And the more tired I was getting. And I kept holding out a hand for the old man to help me up because he was the only one around. And he looked, not the strongest, but he was the only one there. So instead of taking my hand, though, he just kept saying quietly, just stand up. You can just stand up. And I was like, are you gaslighting me right now? I can't stand up. What are you doing? I can't get up. Are you listening to me? Are you deaf, old man? And the longer I was stuck there, the more agitated and frightened I was getting. And the mud was like filling my nostrils and my mouth. Like I felt like I was going to drown. And I started to panic. And at this point, the old man gets down on his knees in the mud and he holds my face and he's like, listen to me. Just stand up. Just stand straight up. You can just get up. And I was too exhausted and scared to argue anymore. So I just put my hands down and started to stand up. And somehow I was standing all of a sudden, which was shocking. I could still feel the weight on my shoulders, but somehow I was able to stand. And now I can look around a little bit, and I see that we're in like a crop field surrounded by a little fence. And looking over my shoulder, I realized that the weight on my back was a yoke. And there was a space for another set of shoulders. And so I'm not a farmer. Are there any farmers in here? In Worcester? Come on. But the yoke was attached to like a seating contraption, right? And this old man underneath the other side of the yoke with me, and we seed this field like so fast. In the blink of an eye, it's done. And he did that without asking. And I open my eyes, and Owen's still there praying. I'm still on the bathroom floor, and I'm like, what just happened? In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, it says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So does Jesus say suffering people should just try harder? No. He invites them, come to me. And does he say, when you come, does he say, and then I'll give you what you want? No, annoyingly. He says, I will give you rest. In hindsight, this makes sense. But ironically, this is the gospel that we chose to have read at our wedding. It's funny to me because I only chose it because it seemed unique. I had never heard it at a wedding. I was like, we're gonna be special. We're gonna do this gospel that nobody reads. And even some friends were like, it doesn't seem very romantic. I'm like, well, it's a great gospel. Switch it. Our daughter's godfather is Father Patrick Schultz. Does anybody know him here? He's really great. And he once taught me that the roots of some of these original words in the Greek. So, syzygios. Everybody say syzygios. I'm probably saying it wrong, but we all did it. That's the word used for yoke here. It's also used when referring to a spouse or two people yoked together in a mission with each other. So in this gospel that was read at our Mass, Jesus is actually deliberately describing a union that he wishes to have with us. And years later, this is now we're at 8 years after this prayer experience I had, I was recommended this book to read, and it describes something really crazy. Most Christians invest a great deal of energy in resisting God. As soon as we stop struggling, an unbelievable amount of energy is released, and we suddenly move at a much quicker pace and are much happier. Resistance to life and its circumstances creates an inner cramp, which is the most significant reason for people's unhappiness. Yes, even if it is difficult to surrender oneself to God, it is still more difficult to struggle against him and resist him. So as I remember this prayer experience I had, I can feel, again, the panic. My heart kind of starts racing thinking about it, being under the weight of that yoke. I tried a bunch of different ways to get out from underneath it, and none of them worked. But God was not asking me to exhibit more strength or develop a better plan. He was asking for my surrender. I thought that the two ways to explain my suffering were either I was not worthy of this blessing or God was not good, and I had chosen the wrong Lord. But those weren't the only two options, of course. In fact, those aren't options at all. I was so blinded by my narrow understanding and framework for suffering. So what is the third option? My favorite book gives us a quote. I'm going to skip part of it, but the whole thing is a really good read. Why does he allow this, right? Why does he allow this suffering? If God had created us in a celestial state from the beginning, so that we'd be held him face to face, we would surely never have sinned. But something important would have been missing. We would not be able to share in the mutual giving, which is the essence of the Trinity. Our desire to give ourselves would never be satisfied, since we would see clearly that we gave nothing. It was God who gave everything, even our love for him. We would see that we were carried away by the waves of love, without even being able to say a personal yes to it. Each of us would have been obliged to say, we have only received and we have never given. But if we are subject to trials on earth, if we struggle to say yes to God, it is because in eternity he wants to say to us, you have given me something. It is not only I who give, but rather we who give to each other. I give myself in gratitude because you have given me something that you could have refused to give. I never forget. If God had let us behold his face from the beginning, we would have been fixed in a definitive state of receiving, but he wanted us to be more like him and live in both giving and receiving. He could not have shown us a greater honor. So, as Father Stinnison, who's the author, says, in our bodies, we are given a built-in way to offer something back to God. And 2 Corinthians also says, we always carry in our body the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. So this means it must be true in my fallen body, even if my fertility is never healed. And fertility is just one example, of course. That's just the thing I talk about the most. But we're all asked to freely give of ourselves, body and soul, back to God. In the Theology of the Body, St. John Paul II wrote, man cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself. And in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus confirms, whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Of course, I'm not saying that we shouldn't ask God to relieve our suffering. And of course, it was like an hour into my migraine that I was like, oh yeah, Lord, can you take this away? I had already looked up like 4 stretches to, fix it. But I think God delights when we ask him, even if the answer is going to be no, for help. St. Paul asked 3 times for the thorn in his flesh to be removed. And when it wasn't, he accepted God's will. Jesus himself said, let this cup pass from me. But always concluding, not my will, but yours be done. And we don't have to romanticize pain or pretend like it doesn't hurt just because we know God can make it good or transform it somehow. We certainly don't need to seek our own suffering. But we can now see the cross in a new way, which is the cross becomes an invitation to make a gift of myself as a living sacrifice, broken body and all, which means I can now see my infertility and all of my suffering totally differently. It's actually not a curse somehow. Suffering on the specific personal path that God set before me gives me the miraculous opportunity to become more and more like him. And like our quote in the beginning said, to worship God. And the more I practice this, the more I become transformed, as St. Paul says, from glory to glory. St. Augustine famously said, in my deepest wound, I saw your glory and it dazzled me. And in the ache of my empty womb, I began to glimpse this glory. When I thought I would die from the weight of the cross, Jesus mercifully revealed some of this truth. He didn't die on the cross in my place so that I didn't have to. That was the question I kept going around asking people. He never said I didn't have to. No, he died on the cross in my place to show me how to, and said that death would not be permanent, right? We'd be risen in glory like him. When I can understand that I can make a gift of myself on the cross through my surrender to Jesus, it changes everything. And the Catechism calls this redemptive suffering. Because of Christ, it says, suffering acquires a new meaning. It becomes a participation in the saving work of Jesus. So this is what transforms suffering from something meaningless and purposeless into something participatory, Eucharistic, fruitful. In other words, when we join our suffering to his, it takes on a redemptive value for our own holiness and for the salvation of the world. St. John Paul II actually dedicated an entire apostolic letter on salvific suffering. He said, suffering unleashes love. Christ has raised human suffering to the level of the redemption. And again, my favorite book, Father Sinison puts it in a very clear and concise way. He says, it is an undeniable fact that the Father did not prevent the painful death of his only begotten Son. That's wild. Pause there. I was like, why are you letting me suffer this way? And he's like, this is kind of my thing. I allow this. But that fact is kind of an archetype, which shows us 2 things very clearly. The first is that suffering and even total ruin do not signify a lack of love on the part of the Father. The second is that suffering is not in vain. It bears fruit and has redeeming power. Since Jesus has gone through it, suffering has become an instrument of salvation. And this applies not only to suffering that is borne generously and heroically, thank God. Who knows how we would react in the torture chamber? It is enough that we try as best we can to accept suffering, or that we merely allow whatever comes our way to happen. So that's great news. I don't have to make sacrifices perfectly in order for God to use it, but practice makes better. And he's given me a lot of practice. So 3 months after Owen and I moved back to Ohio from Louisiana, we finally conceived. We were shocked. We almost couldn't believe it until our daughter was born. It was a total miracle. I was taking fertility treatments that had previously not worked. But if that time had taught me anything, it was that God was in charge of life, and that was up to him. So because of my medical history, our OB allowed us to get an early ultrasound. I was only like 6 weeks pregnant, and in the ultrasound we saw there was 2 gestational sacs. I remember asking the sonographer, who they're not really supposed to tell you like what they're seeing, but I said, "What's that?" And she goes, "Yeah, that's another gestational sac," because I had studied a bit about this, so I knew what I was looking at. In one of them, there was a healthy fluttering heartbeat, which is awesome, but the other one was empty. And so I said, "Does that mean there were 2 babies?" And she said, "At one point, yes, there were 2 babies." So that was Zelly and her twin, Cecilia James, we named her. And we lost Cecilia James in the womb, but we went on to carry Zelly safely, and she's very healthy. Would you be surprised, like I was, to know that my issues with trusting God did not disappear overnight when I gave birth to a baby? I was shocked by this. I remember being in the hospital and looking at Zelly and saying, "Oh no, everything's the same." In my heart, with my relationship with God. Obviously, externally not, but because my infertility wasn't the cause of those things. I thought I'd be totally fixed once he gave me a baby, but my misunderstandings of him did not disappear. Father Sinison says, "Perhaps you believe that if a certain enemy or circumstance disappeared, you would find peace and finally be able to pray. But God uses just this person or situation to deepen your peace, so that it is no longer dependent on external circumstances, but finds its foundation in God." So, like I said, practice helps in these sacrifices, and God has been very generous with opportunities for us to practice. So in the years since, our family has grown a lot, actually, and this is a much more accurate picture of our family. So we have 8 children, 6 of them already with the Lord. Their names are Cecilia James, which is Ellie's twin, Gianna Pio, Joan Francis, Jude, Nectarios, Maura Matthew. And I've been learning about redemptive suffering very gently as this has unfolded. And I cannot begin to tell you how much fruit has been born. I could have done the whole talk on all the fruit that's been given from these little ones. But one of the biggest ones is that I no longer experience sorrow as a punishment from a tyrannical God. The cross I wanted to escape so badly, would have done anything to escape, was the altar where God met me and eventually became the place I most wanted to be. When I was in the pit of despair, I wanted God to give me a baby to prove that he was good. He wanted to show me I was already good. He was already good, and there was nothing I could do to be any more loved by him. While I was begging for him, for healing and for a baby, he was showing me how good he was by offering me a way to become one with him. I wanted a baby. He wanted union. Romans 8 says, "We know that in everything God works for those who love him, who are called according to his purpose." This means that all evil, all suffering can be redeemed and bear fruit by uniting it to Jesus. You might think, all of it? All evil, really, Anna? Yes, from stubbing my toe to losing all these babies. Nothing that happens in your life is arbitrary. God has a good purpose in mind for all of it. And the Bible is full of these stories. Remember in the Old Testament when Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery and their eyes are sort of opened and they realize who he is. Do you remember what he said to them? Anyone? Such a great line. "What you meant for evil, God used for good." What a wild thing to say. And St. Augustine explains this really well. He says, God is so good that in his hand, even evil brings about good. He would never have permitted evil to occur if he had not, thanks to his perfect goodness, been able to use it. And just to show you how much I love this book, another one. God makes use of evil in such a superb way and with such skill that the result is better than if there had never been evil. Okay, so he'll make it good. Got it. But what exactly will he do with it? What is my suffering for? I heard Mother Gabriella from Christ the Bridegroom Monastery share a reflection about the Bible verse in John that says, Jesus is the vine, we are the branches. And her reflection was so beautiful, but to summarize it, she said, when praying about this relationship between the vine and the branch, we got to just be the branch. I wrote, be the branch. Actually, go to the next one. Be the branch. because the branch's main job is to stay firmly united to the vine. It doesn't concern itself with the fruit. Again, I really could spend like days standing here telling you all the fruit that's been born. But the truth is, when it comes to the fruits of our suffering, how God uses those things according to his purposes is not always going to be known to me. Earlier, we kind of differentiated between different types of suffering, like ones I'm forced into, things that are chosen. So I might be choosing it now, but what if I can't decide if the outcome is worth it? And back again to Father Sinison, who says this so eloquently. The most important thing is that we believe it is he who is writing the book of our lives and that we allow him to write. We do not need to understand completely what he is writing. Neither could the authors of Holy Scripture understand what the Holy Spirit meant. It would be revealed at the proper time. The essential thing is to know that God means something with all that happens, and to live in such openness and wakefulness that he can give us insight into the meaning when he wills. When he does allow us to see some of the fruit, man, it's such a joy and such a gift. It's like remembering that your parish is beautiful when you see an ugly parish. When we remember, like, he doesn't have to let us in to the fruit. My salvation is enough. But when he does, he doesn't have to do that. It's just generosity. Because he's proven himself to be good and faithful enough for me to trust him even when I don't understand. And this is the story of Job, right? Job questions God. Why did you allow such things to happen to me? And the way I read it now, I used to hate that book of Job. I used to hate it because I didn't like how God responded. It sounded too harsh to me. And it's all about your point of view, right? Because now when I read it, I think God is very gentle in saying, like, you're just not going to get it. You're just not going to get it. When our 6-year-old asks us certain questions, I'm like, listen, I could try to tell you. It just might make things worse. It's just, you're not going to understand right now. So surrendering to that, like being a mystery, is also a gift. Suffering used to be a problem to be solved by me in my own power, with my own effort, and that worked out with my face in the mud. Now, suffering is a mystery to be received. It's entirely up to God. I don't have to wear myself out trying to escape. All I have to do is say yes with open hands. Now, I really hate hearing a spiritual talk where they're like, be obedient and be faithful and be hopeful. And then they're like, see ya. And I'm like, wait, how? How are you supposed to do that? That happens to me all the time. So what needs to be done to take our suffering from purposeless to infinitely fruitful? Of course, this will look different for everybody in our own lives, but reflecting just on my own story, I came up with a couple concrete steps. So for me, the realization of the yoke on my back was the first step. I had to recognize the enormity of the weight I was carrying, and with that obviously comes the reality that I cannot lift it by myself. So number one is acceptance, or at least naming it, honestly, if not acceptance. And I don't think I had the capacity to accept the cross at that time. I was just too weary, to borrow Jesus' words. But in the meantime, I could name it and say it's something really heavy and dark. For me, a real turning point was when a Catholic therapist told me, there's something different about the cross of infertility. Because what I had in my head was, everybody's suffering, and you're the only one who can't do it. And I don't know, it was just enough confidence in, like, no, what you're experiencing is actually very, very heavy and hard. So without denial, bring the pain into the light of prayer, and maybe name it out loud, to someone who knows the Lord. Number two, unite it to Christ's passion. Again, how? Who here is offer it up all the time? Offer it up. That became a cliche to me because I would try to share the suffering with somebody and they'd say, well, you have something to offer up. And I'm like, go away. Yeah, I didn't want to do that. But it's not a cliche. It's participation. It's participation. So I actually don't use that language with myself, like, offer it up. I just say, like, use this, Lord, because it's obviously a mystery. And it's part of how we surrender, knowing God's ways are higher than I can understand. In fact, that's all this step is surrendering. And I take some, like, tangible step, to do that. I say, God, I don't know how this works. Please receive this offering, place it on your cross, use this for whatever you want. I trust in you. Father Boniface Hicks, again, he says 3 words: God, use this. That's all you need. Instead of offer it up, God, use this. There's also beautifully written prayers in the church. One of my favorite is St. Teresa's Act of Oblation to Merciful Love. Number 3, ask for the transformation and be confident that it will happen. So earnestly ask him to make your suffering fruitful and know that he will, and he does. I say, Lord, I know your ways are higher, but as much as I can understand, allow me a glimpse, maybe, into the mystery of your redemption. And he has no problem doing that. He has no problem showing you at least some of the fruit. I'm practicing a lot, to say, use this offering to heal anything that separates us. Because I want to remember that our sacrifices do not need to be perfectly in order for God to use them. And remind yourself as often as necessary that God makes all things new. He loves to make all things new. So aside from these steps, never underestimate the power Jesus has within the sacraments of the church. Receiving the Eucharistic, that's very theology of the body, reminding us how to speak the language of love with our body. And the church fathers refer the sacrament of reconciliation in terms of a physician and a patient really, really often. So don't be afraid to approach the divine physician for healing. I used to go into confession when I was going way too much and say, I don't want to be here. That's the first thing I need to confess. And thank God I had really beautiful people and priests who were willing to, be in that with me. And if you suffer physically, remember that the anointing of the sick is not just for the dying. So you can, talk to the priests about what might be appropriate. And while you're talking to them or anybody else at the parish, you could say, are there any groups that I could be a part of? Even if you're not going through something right now, because community for me has been one of the biggest places of healing, because healing happens in relationship, primarily with God, but he uses other people a lot. So lastly, read the lives of the saints. We know that these holy people endured great pain and for the salvation of souls, really, for our souls. And they imitated Jesus so well that they're now in heaven with him. So if we're feeling lost, reading these stories could be a tremendous source of encouragement. I knew that I might go long, so I wrote some of the saint stories at the end of the handout. So to kind of wrap up, I just have one more invitation for you. If you remember nothing else from what we discussed, this was just on my heart today to leave you with. We're clearly all on our own roads to the cross, and on my journey so far, the Lord has revealed to me so many areas of my life that he wanted to come into and redeem that I didn't even know needed redemption. I wouldn't have known to ask for that. And I really believe I wouldn't have been open to that work if my heart wasn't broken already. So in the throes of infertility, Father Patrick, who I mentioned earlier, once said very gently, I wonder if this is God's way of tearing down the idol that you made of him that actually doesn't resemble him at all. And I think now, what if I had gone my whole life believing I could earn his gifts and favor? What if my love for him had stayed so fragile that any suffering made me question who he was? Because now that we've come through that place, honestly, if Jesus came and gave me the choice, and he said, I will take this cross from you if you want me to, but you and me, it will be different, because this place has been my closest point of communion with him. I would say no. I really would choose to suffer the exact same way. Yes, I would have less sorrowful mysteries, obviously, but I wouldn't know Jesus or the cross the way I do now. And I'm sure that's going to continue happening. Don't mean to say that that's done. So when suffering next comes in your life, ask yourself, what is God trying to teach me about himself? Because we can be certain that every single part of our lives is being reordered for our good at all times, according to his purposes. And if we feel like things are hopeless, there appears to be no fruit, suffering seems useless, look inward for just a moment and ask yourself, do you really trust him to work all things for your good, even this thing? Is your faith strong enough to be obedient to the call he's given you, even when it's unbearably painful? If he never removes the thorn in the flesh, will you stay? If you have to wait until eternity to understand, will you love him as you wait? We may not see the fruits of our labor that we expect, at least not on this side of heaven, but there's so much goodness to be discovered when we let God be himself. Romans tells us the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed. I can't even imagine how beautiful heaven will be given the glory that's already been revealed to me now. And the suffering of this present time is not even worth comparing to what's going to be revealed. Like, I can't believe that.